Morning!
Madman!
Welcome to the India Explained podcast, recorded in London and San Francisco. One take, unscripted, no rehearsal.
Hey Bunty, greetings from San Francisco. Welcome back. I believe you had a wonderful trip to Japan with your family. It's a place I've always wanted to go to.
I think, Rohit, you should. It's one of I'd recommend it to you and all the people who are listening to our show. It's one of the best countries to visit. It's very clean. People are very respectful and polite. A hugely enjoyable time, and this was our third visit in 3 years. So we are massive fans of the country. But no, glad to be back though. On which note, what should we kick off proceedings with today? What are we going to talk about today?
Well, I think there's been 2 or 3 big stories, and one of the biggest stories over the last few weeks has really been concerning the sort of spate of attacks on women. And there was the case involving the 8-year-old child who was from a community of nomadic herders, I believe, Bakarwals. And this is a crime that had occurred in Jammu about 3 months ago, and it's surfaced now because it's a really gruesome crime. I mean, they were she was someone who was sexually assaulted in a temple by a number of people, including state officials and a father and son duo. And they would obviously some kind of attempt to cover it up. There's courageous journalist who brought it to the fore. So the story surfaced in the last couple of weeks, and then there's something called the Hindu Ekta Manch, which didn't allow lawyers to file an FIR against the accused. The lawyer who took it up got death threats. A lot of people have spoken up about it, and then a number of people who are sympathetic to the ruling dispensation have said that those who are protesting against it are also condemning India in ways that are anti-national. Now, simultaneously, there's also been some other events. There was a BJP MLA in UP who was accused of assaulting a woman, and she's a minor, 17 years old, I think. And when her father and she complained, she tried to immolate herself outside the CM's residence. Her father was taken into custody, beaten by the police, and died. And since then, there have been, another few incidents in UP itself. I mean, 3 or 4. That I think is one of the big stories. The other story has been, and maybe we can talk about it in the next episode, the acquittal of Maya Kodnani. But I thought, each of these cases is very complex in themselves in terms of, the timeline. But collectively, I thought maybe we can just discuss a couple of things. One is that, is it like, what does this speak to? The fact that there is it seems to me that there is a good case that can be made that there's a kind of crisis in the country when it comes to violence against women and children, and particularly, those from a vulnerable background. And what does it mean when the BJP says that, the opposition is politicizing it? Is demanding women's rights not a political act? I mean, what is wrong with the word political? Considering that the BJP itself had generated a lot of political capital out of the Nirbhaya case, I don't think actually, to the credit of the Congress, that that's what they're trying to do. I mean, I do think that, this is an issue that everyone should sort of participate in. So maybe we can, these are a few issues that are something that I think we can discuss.
Okay, I think discussing these types of topics always is very loaded, because I think the ruling party will say, BJP will say, that we are not in any shape or manner condoning this crime against vulnerable women, right? And they will say that laws are taking shape that are being put into place that will respond in the strictest and most punitive manner against these types of violence directed against women and vulnerable sections of the women. I think I don't want to go down that corridor of conversation, only because I do not know enough about the legal twists and turns of what the case where it sits. Where I'd like to pick up on the observation that you made was that at what point in the national discourse does criticizing bad public behavior or institutional failing become anti-national or be seen to be anti-national. So if you say that we are not a superpower, 60% of our country are still poor and it's an agrarian economy. Our farmers are really badly off and they are committing suicide. When you say that, which is a set of facts, how does that make a person anti-national? Similarly, when you level a critique against the government for not being in a position to safeguard and look out for vulnerable women who have been brutalized and in this case raped, and you call that out, it is all of a sudden seen by certain sections of the media and punditry to be anti-national. And I think that is the dangerous trend where all of a sudden you start equating free observation and critique of government and society and in social institutions, which I think we should be allowed in a democracy, to become, kind of anti-national. So, and I think that that to me is a big risk. And I think increasingly with this government, this kind of polarization has been dialed up.
Right. I think, there's absolutely no disagreement I would have with you on that. And I think that's been a distinct difference between the previous government and this one. I mean, all governments dislike criticism. All governments are on the back foot and equivocate, on a variety of issues. Now, I'll make a couple of observations. The first is that, governments themselves are reflections of, our society. And it's true that because of the first past the post system that we have in the Indian democratic system, 31% of people voted for, the BJP. But, well, that's just the way the dice rolls. So, in some ways, this government reflects the mandate of the people. And even in terms of social attitudes towards, whether it's women or caste, these people are products of Indian society. So there's so to say that their attitudes are entirely separate from society at large, whether it's a BJP government or a Congress government, is in my view sort of letting, ourselves as a society off the hook. The second point, and again, it's easy to sort of, demonize, the feudal structure in villages and so on. But many of these attitudes are pervasive across, caste and class and education level. The second point I'll make is that, yes, the BJP is not the only party which has, people with misogynist attitudes. Whether it's Abu Azmi from the Samajwadi Party, whether it's, Congress leaders, and whether it's Hindus, Muslims or Christians. I mean, there's a range of politicians who over the years have made a number of very troubling remarks. What's worrisome is that in both these cases, I think the sexual assaults themselves, the Kathua in Jammu and Kashmir and the Unnao case, I think they were political and communal acts, because in the first case in Jammu and Kashmir, it was also a case of, there's this community of herders or nomads who have some grazing rights over land, and they have land rights. And this was an act also meant to terrorize the community so that, there could be some investment, there could be, the land could be forcibly acquired. And then the fact that these, lawyers, Hindu Ekta Manch, that's what they're calling themselves, lawyers preventing the, course of law to take place and doing it in the name of this kind of majoritarian nationalism, I think is deeply troubling. In the second case, Unnao in UP, this is, what's happened under the dispensation of Yogi, who is, crimes against women, by his own admission, recently he gave out some figures, have skyrocketed. So those are, I think, 2 points on which, the government does need to be criticized. And then the third point I'd just make is that when you look at many of these crimes which are committed by, whether it's someone who's a laborer or it happens, on a footpath, or a family that's very, very poor, this is also taking place in the larger context of a complete failure in post-colonial India of, women's rights, of equality, of inequity. These are, in many cases, the perpetrators are people who have been, they have themselves been brutalized from childhood onwards, that, they lack maybe the whole capacity for empathy, compassion, or even any kind of basic humanity, in some ways has been kind of, beaten out of them or brutalized out of them.
Look, I mean, we've talked about it at great length, and we've covered as many angles as in our kind of cumulative expertise will allow us to. Where I'd like to leave it at this conversation is I hope that the law of the land takes its course. I hope that criticizing institutional failures, irrespective of which part of the country it happens in, is not construed to be anti-national. In fact, we need people to stand up and call out the government for failing and other institutions for failing, whether it's police or other establishments. I think that's a fair thing to do. And let's probably revisit this kind of story, because though it's fairly gruesome to cover in the run of things, but let's come back to it in a month and see what's gone down.
Right. And I should just mention that, since then, as a response, the government has proposed a law, or I assume they've proposed it and it's not, on the books as a law yet, of imposing the death penalty for, child rapists when the victims are below 12 years old. And, experts on this issue have said that the death penalty usually doesn't work as a deterrent. But so that debate is, going on at this point of time. So yes, we'll see how it, what sort of happens. But there seems to be some outrage, and in some ways we are back at that moment of 2012 when the Nirbhaya case happened, if this leads to, in any ways, a wider and ongoing discussion and set of measures, that maybe, there'll be some progress made. But you're right. I think we should, wrap it up for now and revisit it a while later.
Cool. Let's do that.
Take care, man.
Thank you so much for listening to us. Rohit and Bunty would like to sign off. Please stay tuned. Follow us on India Explained on Twitter. Keep listening. Thank you for all your support.